Hello and welcome to All About Boston. I'm Seth McCoy. Joining me tonight, I have three at-large City Council candidates. Michael Flaherty is going to be the first guest, then Seamus Whalen, followed by Francisco White. If you have a question for any of the candidates, you can call us here at 617-708-3290. I want to remind people that if you miss any part of tonight's show, you can tune in to us on our Facebook page and also on YouTube. Just look for the All About Boston YouTube channel. And with that, I will say hello to my old friend, Michael Flaherty. Welcome back to the show.
Nice to see you, Seth.
Nice to see you.
Always a pleasure.
I know. So I think probably the last time I had you on the show, you were a city councilor. I don't think I didn't do any of the during the mayor's race last time. But you're running to get back on the city council. How come?
Well, I'm excited. Obviously, this is a great opportunity for the Boston City Council. For the first time in 20 years, the city's going to have an opportunity to elect a new mayor. And with that, the council actually has an opportunity to play probably a more significant, if not equal partner role in city government. And so with 5 members of the city council coming off the council to run for mayor, clearly the council will be void of a significant amount of leadership.
Yep.
I know the job, I know the city, I know its neighborhoods, and clearly I can hit the ground running. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to run for the seat, to renew my commitment to the city through the city council, and quite frankly be able to work with members of the council, but also to work with the new administration that's going to be coming in. It's going to be a brand new experience for them, and for them to be able to work with experienced members of the council. I think that bodes well. It's a better scenario for the residents and for the taxpayers of the city. So that, in a nutshell, is what excites me about being in this race. It's about really having the ability to possibly take the city council to another level between as the legislative branch of city government.
Did you think for a minute about running for mayor again?
Clearly, I mean, you'd think about it because that opportunity sort of presents itself, but I was kind of tired of fighting on multiple fronts, and not quite sure my family was sort of up for it. It takes a tremendous toll on you when you do run, as you're starting to see now with 12 candidates running for mayor. Your schedule is extremely hectic. It does take a lot out of you, but nonetheless, I also know that I've never been one to sort of take my ball and go home. I know that there's a role for me to play in city government, and felt that this was probably the best avenue to get back out there and to help the residents of the city. And so with when I first started to think about it, there was one opening, and then lo and behold, there was 2 openings. And I said, you know what, I think there's an opportunity there to restore some leadership and some experience back to the council, working clearly with Council President Murphy and other former colleagues in the council. I think that the feedback I've been getting across the city, not only from former colleagues, but also from the public, that they welcome my candidacy, and they're looking forward to hopefully a return to Michael Flaherty on the city council.
Yeah, and that's something clearly you have, is that experience of actually doing that job previously. So it's not a situation where you'd have to step in and have that learning curve, which I talked about this last week with a couple of the candidates, where, you know, we were talking about term limits, and you come into the job and basically you're trying to learn it if you're new to the job, and then before you know it, you're running for re-election. And it's difficult enough as an incumbent, you know, for somebody who's already been there, has the experience down, to have that 2-year window. You know, the first year you're working hard, the second year you're still working hard, but you're running again.
But you're also campaigning. No, that's true, and that's sort of like the cycle of how that works. And but nonetheless, obviously, that come January, there'll clearly probably be a lot of new faces in city government, and that's exciting. That's refreshing with new faces, new ideas, a new sense of energy, which I clearly think that the city needs and has needed for a while. That said, we might see new department heads, new commissioners, new deputy commissioners. So there will definitely be some new faces in city government. And again, having sort of a working knowledge of how to get things done down at City Hall. It's a it's a $2.6 billion corporation. I think the school department is somewhere in the vicinity of 38% of that budget. There's a lot of pressing issues that face our city: the need to improve the quality of our schools, the need to reduce crime and violence, particularly youth violent crime, the need to address the substance abuse epidemic that impacts most of our neighborhoods, and the need to get people back to work again. So real important, critical issues to keep our city moving forward at a time when there's going to be significant transition with so many members of the council coming off and a new administration. So I think that there's a role for me to play, working alongside of other experienced members to at least restore order and a level of, commitment to the city that is going to be, hopefully, will allow for a smoother transition with the new mayor coming in.
Absolutely. All these issues you brought up are things that we've talked about for years and years. One of the things that I remember we talked about specifically on the show before was you wanted to introduce financial literacy to the residents of Boston. Is that something that you would still work
Sure.
towards?
Yeah, and then obviously getting people banked and having them banked locally is huge. We had a hearing. I remember we had the hearing in the city council, and we learned that the kids that were working summer jobs, many of them did not have a sort of a regular traditional banking account, nor did anyone in their families. And we found out that they were cashing their paycheck, their summer job paycheck, at local check cashing outfits and paying exorbitant fees. And I found that very disheartening to find out that this was happening at the very basic level of a young teenager going to work. So we set out on an effort to try to get the financial literacy, have that be part of the curriculum within the Boston Public Schools, but also to engage local banks that we do business with, that we deposit funds with as a municipality, to give back a little bit and to start to introduce the importance of financial literacy and the importance of having doing business with the traditional lending institution, but also your credit worthiness, whether you want to buy your own car or you want to buy your own home at some point. So, and trying to introduce that to kids at a younger level, the importance of saving and the importance of making good, sound financial decisions is I think is critical. So we will continue to obviously advocate for those things and other things. But there was some success around that program, and hope to be able to get back there to push it forward more.
Absolutely. Are you surprised that nothing much has changed with the Boston Public Schools since you were on the council till now? It seems, again, this is an issue people talk about year after year. At what point, do we see change? Sure. And certainly there's been change over the years, minimal change, but...
We see the budget numbers going up, increasing. We see transportation costs ballooning. Yet we still have kids that go to school that don't have textbooks. We have I guess an achievement gap. I like to say that you can drive a freight train through. So identifying the causes of that, and it could go from things like hunger, and it could be domestic violence and sexual abuse at home. It could go to a learning disability. So I think we need to identify sort of the root causes of the achievement gap, and then put the appropriate resources to that. The way I would like to see it done is I'd like to take those decisions out of Court Street and have school site funding. Let's sit down with the teachers and principals. We have some phenomenal teachers and principals, and as well as social workers and nurses that do tremendous work in our Boston Public Schools. Let's sit with them in the beginning of the school year or at the end of the previous school year, identify what their needs are, and let's fund them and allow them to sort of control the budget at the local school site, and then let's hold them accountable. Right now, it's sort of a one-size-fits-all. It all comes out of Court Street. So I'd like to reverse that because what's working in one school may not work in another school, and again, that's up to the teachers and the principals who know these students the best. And so let's identify also some success stories. Let's see what schools are doing extremely well, and let's try to replicate that. And that could be a Boston Public School, because there are good things happening in our Boston Public Schools. It could be a parochial school, it could be a private school, it could be a charter school. So let's see what's working in these respective schools, and let's replicate them. I think one of the models I like to use is the neighborhood house charter school. In some instances, they have 2 teachers per classroom, and obviously they have the extended day portion of it, but they also have enough clinicians, those social workers that help out in other situations or in a situation where someone has a learning disability. So all critical components. And let's try to identify these issues early on in one's education, at first, second grade level, so we can right the ship and provide a good quality opportunity. And unfortunately, that does not happen in every neighborhood. There are some neighborhoods that do have a good quality school, and there are others that don't, and which is, again, that's very problematic. And at a time when we boast of having the best colleges and universities in the world that call Boston their home, we can and must do better with respect to our Boston Public Schools, because all the opportunity that's coming online, if you just think about whether it's the South Boston Waterfront, the Innovation District, we talk about our hospitals, our colleges, they're our largest employers. And if there's a barriers to entry to getting those jobs because you don't have an education, or you have a CORI, or you have a learning disability, and we're not addressing that at the very early critical ages, those individuals are not going to have an opportunity to compete for those opportunities, for those jobs, to sustain themselves and their family. We're just going to see this endless cycle continue.
And also vocations.
Huge. I'd love the trades to come back, and I can't tell you how many people I've met on the street that said if it wasn't for Boston Tech, I'd be dead or in jail. And that's exactly the way they say it. And you think about the Boston building trades, great jobs, great paying jobs with good benefits, good wages, good health plan, and introducing or having some conduit or a trade school in Boston. And when you were in school and when I was in school, same thing, but school's not for everybody.
Right.
I hate to say it,
Exactly.
but the facts are what the facts are.
Yep.
Math, English, science, social studies is not for everybody.
Yeah.
It's for some, it's for most.
Yep.
But there is a sort of a, I guess there is a, you know, I guess a critical segment that chooses to get into the trades, and if
Yeah.
we can engage them at an early age and have trade schools available, those are our chefs, those are our engineers, those are our mechanics, those are our
Exactly.
technicians. Again, great jobs, good wages, good
Yeah.
benefits, but and trying to find
Yeah,
that.
it's almost like at a certain point, people started saying, "Oh, vocations are bad. Everybody has to go to college," which is ridiculous.
Yep.
And also, when you're in high school and even middle school, sometimes you're taking stuff. I had this conversation last week with Catherine O'Neill, and I said, "Look, when I was in school, I knew for a fact I didn't want to take algebra. I could not. It's like
Find
a
your
foreign
way around
language
it.
to me."
Yeah, you
and-
find your way to get into an elective.
And that's what I
Yeah.
did because
No, it's true.
it just didn't apply to me. I couldn't.
Yeah.
I knew that it wasn't going to be a good thing for me, and I knew I was never going to use it again. Have I ever used algebra in my life? No.
No,
And that's the thing with a lot
agreed.
of students. They don't.
And if you had another course maybe available to you, or a
Right.
particular trade that was available to you, maybe you matriculate or you find. And here's the other problem: is if you think about it, like when you think about sort of building trades and you talk to men and women in the building trades, for some it's generational.
Right.
Their introduction to the iron workers was their grandfather was an iron worker.
Right.
Their introduction to the Teamsters was that their father was a Teamster.
Right.
So there's so many people in our city that don't have that sense of connection to the trade, so they don't even know about it.
Yeah.
They may not even know what a pipe fitter or a sheet metal worker or
Right.
a glazer does.
Yep.
Exposing these young men and women to the trades at a very young age and give them a sense as to what it is and what it means. They may take a liking to it, and again, that's the next generation of plumbers and plasterers and painters. So again, all great trades and great wages, great benefits. And when you talk about the connection between trying to increase the job opportunities for local residents on local construction projects, there's an opportunity. The other segment that I've talked about, and I will continue to talk about during this campaign, is the green economy, those green collar jobs.
Right.
If there's ever a sector that you can connect those that face barriers to entry, again, because of lack of education or because of maybe a core issue,
Yep.
green collar jobs, that industry is ripe for, it's a perfect marriage
Right.
for folks that have been struggling to find work. And you know, whether it's solar, whether it's you know, all the things that we're talking about and reading about, we're going to need people
Yeah.
to fill those slots, and I think we need to be paying a little bit more attention to that. So again, all good stuff, all positive stuff, and if we can connect the dots here, we might be able to make a big difference in people's lives.
Do you think part of the problem with the schools not being able to turn around is because of what goes on at Court Street, or is it because of the teachers' union?
No, I think a lot of it's driven by Court Street. It's a bloated bureaucracy, and decisions are being made. The most important, it's actually the appropriate way, I guess, to think about it. It's we're the consumer. If you're a parent with a child in the Boston Public Schools, you are the consumer.
Right.
Decisions are not made based on the consumer. The children at times are often the last ones that are thought about when decisions are being made
Right.
down at Court Street. I think it's a bloated bureaucracy that we need to identify, and the best way to do that, I think, is to take the financial decisions out of Court Street, put it directly at that school site, create more autonomy at the individual school, again, with great teachers and great principals. We've seen the role that a great teacher and a great principal can provide in turning a school around.
Right.
So let's give them the resources at the school site level so that kids have books.
Right.
So we have before and after school programming, and that's programming that's relevant,
Yeah.
not just sort of babysitting and looking at a clock, but keeping kids engaged.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're going to get that if we continue to just pass the budget and have those financial and those budgetary decisions made down at Court Street. I think we need to take them out, and that's the only way we're going to get to true accountability.
Right.
Having teachers and principals that have great resumes that are not allowed to do what they're trained to do, which is to teach our children, or to identify early signs of issues that they could address through appropriate funding streams at the school site level. So I don't think it's the teachers union at all. Again, they're committed. They're rolling up their sleeves. They want to find a solution to make our schools better. And again, this isn't to say that there are some very positive and some great things happening. My children attended the Boston Public Schools. They went to the Murphy School,
Yeah.
which is a K-8 in Dorchester. So we've been the beneficiary of getting a good quality education in the East Zone. We'd like to have that opportunity for people across all of our neighborhoods. So.
Definitely. And one thing that and is totally not related to the city council, but MCAS, I wish that was not even part of.
I agree with you.
It's ridiculous. Some kids don't standardize test well, and also we shouldn't be teaching to a test.
I would agree with that, and and at times I find it to be very punitive, and it's not indicative of how well a school is performing.
Right.
If at the best, maybe it's a barometer. You could use it as a barometer, but it should not be the sole criteria as to identifying whether or not a school is performing well, or whether or not a child should be able to go on to the next level.
Right.
You're also looking at someone that oftentimes had struggled with standardized tests.
Me too.
It was great, always showed up and participated in class and did great written work. And but when it came to the multiple choice selection, and for some, it's time management. For some, it's test taking skills. Some, it's elimination of choices. So
the pressure of just having that time on you.
And was never indicative of my success as a student. I mean, having gone to schools locally, having gone to BC High, Boston College, Boston University School of Law. So, but yet was someone that always sort of had struggled at the standardized test level.
Right.
And so I would agree with you wholeheartedly that if we're going to use it for anything, or if it's attached to certain funding streams, which more often than not it is, then we use it as a barometer. We don't use it as a sole criteria. Because I think at times, particularly for our children, it tends to be punitive. And for those particularly that have a learning disability or an English language learning issue, because of language barriers, they're at a huge disadvantage. And you've seen it. You see kids that come to our country and they're thrust into an environment where they're just trying to learn the language, and then they get this high stakes, winner-take-all MCAS test that they're still trying to get their hands around sort of basic principles of. Yeah, and I think at one point I thought they said. I think the statistic is we have like maybe 26 different languages
I think so,
spoken
something, there's a lot.
in and around the Boston public schools, and so I would agree, I'm with you 100% on that. Again, not to beat the dead horse, but it tends to be punitive, and I like to see it
So
not be
if
indicative.
people at home want to know more about you, if they don't know who you are, which I would be surprised at since you've been around for a number of years. You're very young still, but still a number of years. How can they find you?
Well, obviously my website, www.michaelflaherty.com. Our headquarters is located at 190 Old Colony Ave in South Boston, which is directly across the street from the Ironworkers Hall. Feel free to come up to me at a neighborhood event. There's a block party if there's something going on in your community. Most often I'll be there, and we can engage in a conversation as to what issues are important to that particular individual, or maybe something that's happening in their community that they think that the City Council should be paying attention to, or should be being addressed down at City Hall. So I look forward to working with folks across the city, and I look forward to hopefully getting an opportunity to work with you.
Great, absolutely. Thanks for coming back
Great
on.
to have me.
Good to
Thank
see
you so much. I appreciate your time.
No problem. And we will be right back with Seamus Whalen. Stay tuned. And welcome back to All About Boston. My guest right now is Seamus Whalen, one of the candidates for the at-large City Council seat. If you have a question for us, you can call us here at 617-708-3290. Seamus, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So I just found out before we went on air that you live in West Roxbury, which is near and dear to my heart because I lived there for a number of years on Spring Street. So it's a great neighborhood. But let's talk about why you're running for the Boston City Council.
Yes, this is my first attempt at public office, and I'm basically running because I'm tired of the same old politics as usual. And I want to put forward a real alternative to Boston voters. I'm running as the socialist alternative candidate. I'm running as an open socialist, and I feel the ideas I'm putting forward, the vision I'm putting forward, offers a real alternative than the same old politics.
What are some of the things you want to see accomplished if you were to be elected?
Well, I feel one of the problems with politics is the domination of our whole political process by corporate money. The last election cycle saw something like $6 billion going. And you have a situation where that money is overwhelmingly coming from large corporations.
But is that at the national level?
At the national level, but also at the local level. I mean, some of the top funded campaigns at the moment have, I saw one campaign, city council president of over 180,000 he's been able to collect. In this country, you have 50 million people living near poverty and 100 million people just above the poverty level. That's almost half the population.
Right.
So working people generally don't give huge amounts of money, and my campaign is actually refusing to take any corporate donations. We're just funding our campaign with volunteers and with smaller donations. And that way I feel I will be accountable to the interests of working people. Also, I'm pledging, if elected, that I won't accept the full 87,000 city councillors make.
Really? What will you do?
I will just take what's an average Boston wage, and the rest of the salary I'm going to put into actual build campaigns and fund campaigns on issues like the need for a higher minimum wage. I work full-time as a registered nurse, so issues like healthcare and the need for what I feel a single-payer healthcare system.
Yeah.
Those type of campaigns, issues of affordable housing, I'll use that. And I really feel that real change only comes about on the basis of building of movements from below. So I'm using the election, and I will use, if elected, the seat as a platform to actually support and build these type of campaigns.
Now, if you're elected, do you have to give up your job as a nurse, or how would that work?
If elected, I will consider giving up my nursing job.
Yeah, I don't mean to put you on the spot, because I just think that's obviously a great profession. So just curious.
I really enjoy nursing, so I will definitely continue to be a nurse in some form or some capacity.
Yeah.
But the main issue with my campaign and the main reason for me running is to really offer an alternative, because voters generally, they just get the same thing year after year. And also the issues I'm raising aren't really raised by most of the field.
Yeah, well, but like for the minimum wage, for example, that's not really something that happens on the city council level. So, I mean, obviously advocating for that would be, but they can't really change what the minimum wage is.
Yeah, and obviously to win something like that would require building a broader movement.
Right.
But some things the city council have been responsible for that affect wages, they haven't done a very good job. I mean, lots of people have heard about the conditions that, say, Boston taxi drivers have worked under for a number of years. That was under the watch of the city council, and they just turned a blind shoulder. And I fully support what many taxi drivers are demanding, that instead of being independent contractors open to incredible exploitation, they should be, salaried employees with full benefits.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, absolutely. I mean, it's a hard job, and sometimes it's a dangerous job to be a taxi driver, especially here in the city. So
it's interesting, when the scandal kind of came out fully in the public, the mayor said if only he knew, he didn't know about it. And I've heard some city councillors say the same, we didn't know. Despite the fact that the taxi drivers and their association lobbied every year for reform of the industry. So, it's, I think when politics are so dominated by corporate money and the big medallion owners plowed big money into city politics, when you'll get these type of situations. So my campaign offers an alternative to that.
So you've been traveling all across the city. What are some of the things that you're hearing from the people that you're meeting? Anything that surprises you? Issues that are important to some of the residents? Yeah,
everywhere. We've really done my campaign has done a lot of outreach throughout Boston. And I usually ask people, what's their pressing concern? And overwhelmingly, I think it's, particularly from the point of view of working people, regular working people, the issue that affects them is that Boston's becoming unaffordable to live in. Yeah. And my campaign really wants to make the city should be affordable for working people to live in. Issues like the need for higher wages, issues like that Boston last year had the second highest increase in rents of any city in the country. We live in one of the most expensive cities in the country, and wages have stayed stagnant. Yep. Also issues like the increasing cost of the tea, of the ride. It's affecting the quality of life, and it's pushing more and more
increased cost and lack of service.
Cuts in services.
Right. Also, definitely something that the city council can advocate for, but also usually a state brought up issue.
Well, the city council and city councillors, from my observations, I've taken up lots of issues on
true.
education and use hearings
Yeah.
and forums as a place to advocate for these issues. Some of them not always positive issues. Like recently I saw attacks on the Boston teachers unions being organized by the city councillor, and I intend to use the seat as a platform and use these types of forums to actually organize and advocate for what Boston residents really need, which is a real alternative and to make Boston a more affordable city.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on the fact that it is a very expensive city to live in. There's definitely this level of people who have a lot and can afford to have a home and, you know, afford all the things that come with that. And then there are a lot of people, there's basically no middle class any longer. It's sort of, you know, the people up here who have a lot and can spend a lot, and then everybody else.
It's interesting, in the last period and the projections for the next period, the last period we've seen, you know, out of every 10 jobs, 7 or 8 of them have been low waged, and that's the projection for the next period.
Right.
And you know, to stop that tide, we need to organize, and we need politicians that actually represent our interests, rather than, you know, they're funded by large contributions, they get into power, and they end up, you know, introducing policies that the banks and corporations and the big developers want to enact.
Yeah, and we also need more affordable housing in the city.
Very much so, and you know, we had a whole situation where, you know, these toxic loans were forced on communities. The banks got bailed out, and you have developers now. You know, my campaign calls for we don't have a city planning authority. We have the Boston Redevelopment Authority, which helps developers. It doesn't help working people in Boston. I call for, you know, the scrapping of the BRA. And for a new development, a real planning authority.
Right, it should be a planning authority, and then if there's a development branch, it should be separate.
I also call for a rent cap in Boston, and for an end to evictions and foreclosures. I support organizations like City Life, who are, you know, campaign and do lots of good work in actually preventing evictions. You know, the banks got bailed out.
How do they prevent evictions? Do they help give money to people who are in jeopardy of being evicted?
They take to the street. They protest outside, you know, developers. There was one recent protest outside a developer's office. A number of developers have bought up all these foreclosed properties, jacked up the price of rents, and actually some developers, you know, where they have to allocate so many affordable housing units, and what's considered affordable is the mean income, you know, which takes billionaires into account. And what some developers will do actually, when they don't meet those requirements, they get a penalty. But it's actually more profitable for some developers to pay the penalty and you know, sell the properties at market prices. And that's a shame. That shows a lack of that, you know, there's no bodies that will actually enact real regulation and reform.
But to protect people from being evicted, are you only talking about larger development places? Because certainly there are smaller landlords who might have tenants who all of a sudden stop paying their rent, and probably, in my opinion, should not be prohibited from being able to start eviction proceedings for people who just aren't paying.
Well, what will stop most people from getting evicted is if their wages and income are higher, if there's real affordable paying, decent paying jobs out there, and if there isn't these massive increases in rent that are totally out of proportion to what people earn. In the last couple of decades, there's been a huge increase in productivity in this country. And the majority of the wealth created from that productivity has gone to the top 1%. Working people, their wages have stagnated. Now we see that 1% in the banks, these corporations, they're actually sitting on trillions of dollars worth of money that they're refusing to reinvest in the city and the community. That's true nationwide, and it's true in the city of Boston. MassPerg recently did a study which showed that the state loses $1.6 billion every year from the corporations and the rich sending their money to avoid taxes out to offshore accounts. I also think in Boston, we have these we have the corporations, but we also have so-called non-profits of hospitals and universities.
Right.
And the communities in Boston they have a tax-free status. Their CEOs make millions. Boston communities need to be compensated from these types of...
That's something Council President Murphy had worked on with his pilot payment reform, which could go a little further, but the argument from the nonprofits, of course, has always been, well, we're tax-free and we're a nonprofit, and look at how much we do for the city. We give scholarships, we do this, we do that, but clearly they're not paying enough to pay their own way, even though they are tax exempt. But I mean, as you said, when the leaders of the hospitals and the colleges are making $500,000, $1 million, million plus, there has to be some sort of, give back to the city. That's
also, there's been some studies that show that their charitable acts are minuscule based on the actual amount of money that the city loses. We're living in one of the richest cities and one of the richest countries in the world. In fact, it's the richest country in the history of humanity. Yep. The wealth is there for residents in this city to have a decent standard of living, to fully fund the type of services and schools we need. Yeah. And, but there isn't a political will to actually enact that.
Right, absolutely.
So voting for my campaign, every vote that I get is a vote for an alternative, that we no longer want the same old politics. We want a real alternative.
How can people find out more about you?
My website is votewhelan.org. Also, Facebook is Vote Whelan, that's WHELAN. And that's the best way to contact us. Our campaign is supported and by volunteers. We have no paid volunteer group. And, we've been really getting out there. In fact, my group, Social Alternative, is a national organization. We're running a number of city council campaigns. We just got one of our candidates in Seattle just got 33% of the vote in the primary in Seattle against a 16-year incumbent.
Wow.
So when an alternative is put to people, people are looking for a real alternative.
Absolutely. Well, I wish you the best of luck, and I want to thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much.
And remind people when they can go to the polls to vote.
24th of September.
It's right around the corner. Did
Yes.
you think it's almost here? Are you almost breathing a sigh of relief?
No, I think there's an opportunity to really get out there and talk to people, which is what we've been doing. We've been at the tea stops, and so there's a lot more to fight for.
Great. Well, thank you again. And
thank you so much.
I want to remind people to stay tuned. We will be back with Francisco White, another candidate for at-large city council. We'll be right back. Welcome back to All About Boston. Francisco White was supposed to be here in this next segment, but I believe he's gotten tied up in some traffic or at another event. So Seamus Whalen has been kind enough to stay put. And so we're going to probably talk less about politics and that sort of stuff and just sort of fill the next probably 10 to 12 minutes with some fun stuff so people can learn the personal side about you and not the political side. So you were born somewhere in Ireland. So where in Ireland are you from?
From a town in County Kildare. It's about 20 minutes south of Dublin. And I moved here in the 1980s. And I've been here since, and
You've loved every minute of it.
Yes.
One of our interns here actually is here for 6 weeks. He's from Ireland as well. Don't ask me where because I don't remember. His name's Thomas, but we are jokingly calling him Colin now, as in Colin Farrell. But so in your, you live in West Roxbury now, but you lived in Brighton before. So those obviously are two neighborhoods that you were very familiar with. Since you've been campaigning, what other neighborhood throughout the city have you been most surprised about that you maybe hadn't gone to before, or maybe you've been to every neighborhood in Boston before?
Well, actually, I know Boston very well because for a number of years I worked as an ambulance driver, different driving jobs. And so I probably know most of Boston better than most Bostonians.
You know all the back roads.
I know how to get out of traffic quickly.
See, Francisco should be with you, or you should have been with him. And,
yeah, he should have called me for a ride.
So what was that like being an ambulance driver? I mean, you must have seen some interesting things. You're a nurse by trade now, so you've seen interesting things as a nurse as well, but...
Yeah, it was very interesting, a real experience. And I put myself through college working full-time.
Wow.
And so I've been a nurse like 14 years, so I'm glad I did all that when I was younger. But now it gives opportunity to get involved in politics. But I've always been political.
Right.
In Ireland, I was very interested in politics, and particularly politics in relation to working people.
Right.
I don't consider myself much of a politician. I see myself as an activist.
Yep.
And that's my interest in politics.
Have people been receptive? I mean, I'm sure they are, but are you surprised maybe when you're talking to some people and you might be going up to them and thinking, oh, this person's not really going to give me the time of day, but then you start talking to them and you can almost see that moment in their eyes that changes and they think, maybe this is a good candidate for me. And of course, people have, 4 votes to use at the end of September. So maybe you'll be earning some votes that initially you didn't think you were going to get.
Well, I think the issue of affordability, and particularly the demand my campaign is putting forward for $15 minimum wage. 1 or 2 people say that, well, is that really realistic? Blah, blah, blah. And, but what I point out is that really if the minimum wage is $8.25 at the moment, and it's just not enough. But if the minimum wage kept up with, say, productivity, it would be $22 an hour. If it kept up with the percentage of wealth increase, the amount of wealth increase that the 1% has made over the last number of years, it would be $33 an hour.
What happens, and excuse my ignorance, but what happens if the minimum wage is increased to $15? Does that, let's say there are people already making $15 as their regular, hourly rate, does that automatically bump everybody else up? Or how would that work?
Well, the more wages are driven down, the more it depresses wages throughout the economy. The more the basic wage goes up, it has a knock-on effect on the economy. Some people have raised questions of, well, if you increase the minimum wage to 15, won't that hurt small businesses and drive small businesses out of business? And that's a concern. There's some validity to that concern. And what my campaign puts forward is that for those small businesses that feel they're going to be really affected by a minimum wage increase in that, we would support fully subsidizing for those small businesses. If they open up the books and show that this is really going to affect their viability, and if the books don't show that they can well afford to pay that,
right,
we would support increasing taxes on big businesses to subsidize that amount. But really, the minimum wage is just an issue that affects all quality of life. It affects every issue like crime,
right,
like just the ability of families to
eating
the ability
healthy.
to eating healthy. Exactly.
Yeah.
Nutrition, health, safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of eating healthy, what's your favorite restaurant in the city?
Oh, I eat a bit too healthily at times. I like a variety of food. If it's just somewhere local, I go for a cheaper option. There's some good restaurants where I live, but I like a variety of food. And some neighborhoods I go to, like I used to live in Alston, Brighton, so I got spoiled with a variety of different restaurants.
They have a lot of vegan, so they have a lot of vegan options for people like myself who eat that way, but also for people if they just want to try a vegan option, which leads me to my next thing. So for the past couple of weeks, every time a candidate comes on, they're talking about different neighborhoods they've been to, and usually they mention Jamaica Plain, which is, of course, just down the street. And so then I am able to mention my favorite ice cream place in the city. They have 2 locations, one in Alston and one in JP, and that's FOMU, which is vegan ice cream. So this is my moment to plug them. Clearly, I'm looking for free ice cream. No, I'm kidding. But I definitely recommend that you check it out if you have not gone in. They are small business owners who own FOMU at both locations, and then they just opened up a restaurant called Root, which used to be where Piece of Pie was on Cambridge Street. So
I've been known to purchase an ice cream every now and again.
And now you'll have to go to the dairy-free option because it's much better for you, in my opinion.
And having healthy choices is so important as a nurse. I mean, it's really difficult to have a balanced, healthy diet.
Right.
And both from the point of view of cost, time, and so that, I think that's something as a society we need to watch. And I think the way the cigarette industry was tackled and the food industry, there needs to be real reform there for what's being forced onto people, and particularly for children. It's and the schools are beginning to, but I think there's a long way to go as regards to education and choice. Yeah,
there's a lot of sugary items that kids are getting from start to finish, a lot of fatty foods, which, don't get me wrong, like I love French fries. Yeah. Like if somebody brought a plate in right now, I'd probably eat the whole thing. But, kids, when they're in school and learning and, trying to be good students and growing up, we should be making sure that they're eating healthy foods.
And in a lot of communities, there isn't a choice there. There isn't a choice of supermarkets and stores where you can get that quality food. And just the media and advertising is just, and particularly for kids, I could never understand why the worst food is shoved at kids with regards to kids' menus.
McDonald's.
And or even just regular restaurants. There's a separate menu of bad food for kids that we don't get offered. So,
Chicken fingers and French fries. Yes. No salads and,
And even at home, and the kids expect 2 meals. You're expected to cook 2 meals. And, so for most parents, that's a fight to say, no, there's 1 meal being provided. And if
unless, of course, you have a child who has dietary restrictions or is vegan, and then it's okay to cook 2 separate meals if the rest of the family is not following suit.
Well, vegan meals are healthy choices within themselves,
Well, see, and that's part of for me, it's one of those things that I have to explain to people all the time, because they look at me and they're like, well, what do you eat? And I was like, well, do you ever have maybe eggplant and vegetables and pasta? Yeah. Well, that's vegan. Unless, you're putting cheese on it, then you're fine.
Well, growing up in Ireland, every meal had to have potatoes and meat,
Exactly. So, meat and potatoes, and that was it. Yes.
So it's nice to live in a city where there's such a variety of food choices and good food.
What's your favorite neighborhood to spend time in?
Depends what I'm doing. I'm a big movie fan, and so there's a number of really good independent movie houses in different parts of the city and out of the city. If it's food, it depends what I'm in the mood for. I'm also a fan of just old buildings, and I like to go to places I've never been to before. And just walk around and so.
Have you been to the Fort Hill neighborhood of Roxbury?
Yes.
That's speaking of nice homes and architecture.
Yes, it's nice to get on a height and just have a view of Boston.
Yeah.
I mean, nearby where I am in JP, West Roxbury, we have the Arboretum. There's so many beautiful parts of Boston. The islands, the Harbor Islands are fantastic.
Yeah, I went there last summer to the Harbor Islands for my first time ever, and it was just, it's a nice ride out to the islands, and then there's just a lot happening. It's just fun. It's like a nice day trip for a family, and it's not expensive to go out there.
I'm a history buff, so I'm really interested in all parts of the city, and actually so much of Boston has been destroyed, and there's a whole history in the post-war period of developers, and that's part of the problem with Boston politics. There's an alliance between the political establishment and the developers, and a third of Boston was destroyed.
The West End, for example.
The West End, and that example of the West End continued in so many neighborhoods. And the point I make as regards to, well, you can't tax rich people, or what will prevent them leaving Boston?
Right.
The city has used laws of eminent domain to benefit developers. We can use those same laws to benefit working people. Jobs belong in Boston. If the CEO wants to leave Boston, well, go ahead. But the jobs belong to Boston. We subsidize them. Our universities provide talent to them. So it's interesting.
All right. Well, we are almost out of time. So again, tell people how they can find you online.
You can find me online, website, Vote Whalen. That's WHELAN. Facebook, Vote Whalen. We're also on Twitter, and we're out there in the city. We will be for the next few months. You'll see lots of us.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for being on. Thanks for being able to stay here when, unfortunately, Francisco could not make it. And I want to thank you at home for tuning in. Again, if you've missed any part of the episode tonight, you can tune in to either the Facebook or YouTube channel to watch the show in its entirety again and again and again. And why wouldn't you want to do that? I want to thank everybody behind the scenes for putting together a great show, and we will see you next time. Good night.